So Simmers, and welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're doing another speed build that is part of the Builders games. For anyone who has missed any of my previous videos for the Builders games, let me give you a quick explanation on what the Builders games are. So the Builders games are a little Sims building competition hosted by Simmers for Simmers. This is created by the wonderful Juby Sims and hosted by Cozy Simmer aka Lina, and throughout the year they always have different seasons, and every season has a different theme, and based on the theme they make like little challenges or like little prompts. Then there is a group of Simmers that joins as the builders, aka what you're seeing in the video right now, and then there is a group of Simmers who joins as the judges. And then for a set amount of weeks people will participate in this Builders games. Some seasons have had eliminations based on the judges, other seasons just had winners and people basically scoring on the builds that they did. And for this season, this is actually the 6th season of the Builders games, the theme was desserts. I have participated in season 5 of the Builders games as well, so if you're interested in seeing more big ambitious builds in the Sims like this, feel free to go check out the playlist on my main YouTube channel that has all of the builds that I've ever done basically for the Sims in it. And then there is also my second YouTube channel, or my third depending on how you look at it, where I store all of my streams. If you want to see like the non-sped up version and the real-time version of how I do these builds, I also have playlists for both the season 5 and the season 6 Builders games. So if you're ever intrigued in how I did something and you feel like the speed build went a little bit too quickly, or maybe we cut it out of the speed build for just purposes of making the video not too long, if you're ever interested in how these things work, feel free to go check them out on my second YouTube channel. And also know that I do quite some building live on Twitch, so if you're ever interested in seeing me build or you have any questions, you are super welcome to join my Twitch streams. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for The Sims. I do also host other types of streams, but if you want to see me playing The Sims, I can recommend coming by on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 7 p.m. CEST. So yeah, without further ado, let's actually get into what you're seeing on the screen here, because there's a lot of things going on. But for this season, like I said, the theme was desserts, and this is the challenge for week 3. And this season is a little bit smaller, or works a bit different than any of the previous seasons you might have seen, because this was a bit of a smaller season, so there were only, quote unquote, only 4 weeks of challenges, and every week there was a shell challenge incorporated. So it wasn't just an assignment and basically you had to make it work, but there was a shell challenge that you had to include. So let me actually kind of walk you through what we're working on here, because the challenge for week 3 was using this specific shell that you kind of see as the empty building in the middle, and we had to place debug buildings next to it with a minimal of 2 debug buildings, but we were allowed to place more if we wanted to make it look like a street. And the shell itself had to be transformed in a bakery for your favorite type of cookie. And you might kind of see a theme starting here. It looks very Dutch. Maybe you can see the Amsterdam Canal slowly forming. Well, you can kind of guess my favorite cookie, but just in case you cannot guess it, my favorite cookie is a Stroopwafel, also known as a Dutch caramel waffle. As a true Dutchie, of course, my favorite cookie is a Stroopwafel. If you've never heard of a Stroopwafel, you might have heard the name Dutch caramel waffle, like I said before, or just caramel waffle. They actually have been popping up across the world because they've been gaining a lot of popularity amongst tourists, so you might have seen them in your supermarket, and I can highly recommend trying them out. These are super delicious snacks that have been around for ages in the Netherlands. Actually, they are not a new thing, but in recent years they have been getting more and more popular, so you also see more and more fresh Stroopwafel bakeries popping up across the Netherlands for tourists to also enjoy this delicious snack, but then like freshly made for them basically. I took this opportunity to not only make a bakery that looks like it's actually making stroopwafels, but also kind of integrate a little bit of cultural details about the Netherlands. You can already see this Amsterdam Canal forming, but throughout the entire build, there is a lot of references to Dutch culture, which I would obviously love to share with you as I'm talking through the video, because I think this is one of my favorite parts about the Builders games, is not only challenging myself to do bigger and more creative builds, but also really truly research the subject of what I'm building. Earlier, I did builds for the season 5 where the theme was world tour, and one of my favorite things was learning about the places that I was building from, because it really gave me an idea of how to bring the build to life and like how to make it look like that place and like genuinely do it justice. Unfortunately, I'm a person who actually grew up in Rotterdam, which jokingly enough is the rival city of Amsterdam. So building Amsterdam in The Sims was a little bit silly. I actually joked about it with my best friend for a little bit that I should have just made a Stroopwafel Bakery in Rotterdam, but unfortunately the streets in Rotterdam aren't as iconic. They are mostly more modern, so I couldn't really convey that, and the debug buildings were just too perfect, so I decided to go for a very traditional Amsterdam Canal anyways. But let me know in the comments down below if you'd like to see me do a Rotterdam inspired build, because you know, I've lived here my entire life. I have some weird architecture knowledge from here, and I think it could be fun to build maybe something from Rotterdam skyline as well. But without further ado, let's actually walk through what you're seeing so far. I've already done a lot of building here, but I'd like to kind of walk you through some of the details and what is going on and things that I had envisioned when I was building this. So for the roofline on the main build that you will see me doing a little bit later in this build, I actually split up the building into two pieces. I first started with one big roof piece, but as the buildings in Amsterdam, like the IRL buildings, are relatively narrow, this shell was actually far too wide to make that look good. I tried and tried and tried, and I ended up completely deleting the first version of the roof and splitting it up into two smaller ones because it just didn't look right. It just didn't look realistic. And I think actually by splitting it up and kind of from the front making it look like it were supposed to be two different buildings, I think that actually worked a lot better. As you can see also on the back of this build, there's two little bump outs, which I have to say, if I had made this shell myself, I would have never put those there because they suggest a far more modern build, and that's just not what we were going for here. But it was kind of a struggle to figure out what to do with those bump outs because they did not work with the roofline. And I finally got my roofline to work at the front, and then the roofline at the back was just not making sense. And then someone in Twitch chat very geniusly suggested that we could make them into chimneys and kind of hide it so the roofline will eventually end at the end of the main part of the build, and then those two little bump outs on the left and right side will just get turned into chimneys, and that worked super well. I also, at the end of the video, but you'll probably see me doing throughout the speed build as well, but I'll make sure to have some screenshots at the end of the video where you can see that this looks extremely cozy at night. I'm not gonna lie, I was so surprised that the debug buildings and the boats that we end up adding later actually light up at night, and it makes it look so alive and so cozy. And this was one of my favorite things about this whole building process, was actually seeing that the debug buildings light up, because I think I'd never noticed that in the world before. I genuinely played in this world because we are building in the university world. We're building in Brightchester. So I've seen this world 7 million times because I've played here a lot, and for some reason I still never realized that those debug buildings light up. I think this is just one of those things that if you play a lot of The Sims, there are certain things that you kind of just get blind for, if that makes any sense, because they just make sense, like buildings lighting up at night. They don't stand out to you anymore, but it's just those small little details that now make me realize that like the Sims team works really hard on making all of these worlds feel alive when you're playing in it. And this to me was such a fun detail to discover. So make sure to keep an eye out for those screenshots at the end of the video. At the back of the build, I actually made a small part of a second canal because in Amsterdam, the canals are actually really close to each other, so it kind of is realistic to have a street with houses and then almost immediately have another canal. So I decided to kind of with that mimic the end of the lot and have that canal. Also here you can see me struggling with these roof pieces. Let me tell you, this was a challenge to get it right. Here we're still going for the wide roof, but eventually I do end up splitting it up into two separate spaces. Then something else is that we obviously in the end add a little street vendor and other things on the back street to really make that come to life. I tried to make like a little playground for children, so I end up making one backyard a bit smaller so we can have some space for like a swing set and stuff like that, because very often in cities they have like more collective playgrounds for the kids. So those are all things that I tried to incorporate to actually genuinely make this look as realistic as possible, to like really make it look like it was a kind of like a cityscape, because I think that eventually sold the build the best. Something else that is actually something that I had to sacrifice for sake of looking good, that wasn't very realistic, is in Amsterdam, houses like this probably don't have backyards. However, I feel like for this build, it just looked so much better to have the little backyards in there. Otherwise, we would have had a really weird and wide street, and I just don't think that would have made a lot of sense. So I'm really glad we did end up adding some backyards. However, IRL, probably a house like this with a backyard would be completely unaffordable. These houses IRL are already going for like millions of euros, and they are so tiny and so small because most of these houses are really, really, really narrow, and they of course have a charm, but they're also quite old. So you'll buy a house for like millions of euros, and that house will probably need a lot of maintenance, and you can't even live there with a family because 9 out of 10 times it would be too small for that. So for realism's sake, these backyards are not really supposed to be there. Please don't come for me in the comments of like, Amsterdam houses don't have backyards. No, I know that. I've been there. But unfortunately, that just doesn't look right in The Sims. And I think that is the thing that I find the most challenging with doing builds that are inspired by IRL places, is finding the right balance between making it look like the real thing, but at the same time also understanding what will look good in The Sims. Because there are just certain things with The Sims being The Sims, and like obviously the scale being slightly off, and just the things that will look good in landscaping and also in relation to the world around it, and being restricted to like a very specific lot. It's one of those things where you sometimes just have to make a decision of like, what is more important? Is it the realism or making it look good? Because I think if you only try to work with realism, it would look terrible. But if you only try to do things that look phenomenal in The Sims, it wouldn't look realistic. So it's always about like finding that balance of which are the key characteristics that I really have to have in there to make sure that I'm like selling the fact that this is an Amsterdam Canal. But at the same time, what things can I sacrifice so that it still looks realistic, but at the same time is also not like getting like really awkward in The Sims in a way that things just don't match up anymore, and it feels like it's almost losing its charm because you decided to go so realistic. So yeah, that's all the things that I wanted to share with you on the outside. Of course, you might have seen earlier that I added a little bike at the bottom of the canal. That's a very iconic thing. IRL, there's much more than just one bike though. If you come to the Netherlands and you come on a day where they're cleaning out the canals, you will be so surprised of the crap that they find at the bottom of the canal. But people on my Twitch stream kept asking if someone was murdered here, and if that's the reason there is a bike at the bottom. Well, I can assure you nothing bad happened here. There's just a bike at the bottom of the canal because it fell in or someone pushed it in. Usually like 9 out of 10 times, the bikes that end up at the bottom of the canal are actually thrown in there by people that are either trying to be funny or might have had a little bit too much to drink, and they forget that it's actually not nice to throw someone's bike into the canal. But they find like things like scooters and like they have even, I think, once found like a sunken boat, and there is just so much crap at the bottom of the canals, and the municipality of Amsterdam takes so much effort to clean it, and for some reason multiple times a year they still have to like re-clean it because so much crap ends up in there. So only one bike, again, is not the most realistic, but I still think it was an important detail to add in there. And it was also a fun thing for me to kind of experiment with tool, because at least up until this point when I was building the outside of the build, I hadn't used tool that much. So I was craving some silly tooling basically. In the end, I do end up using tool a lot for this build, but I'm not going to spoil for what yet, because I'll tell you about that when we actually get to the inside. You can kind of see me struggling, or struggling is not the right word, but I was definitely challenged by a floor plan for this build because it was really wide but also quite long. So I wanted to prevent making like extremely long hallways. So I had to come up with something that worked and also made sense with the fact that this actually in the end was a pretty big build, because it doesn't look like it when you first look at this lot. But this build, this shell, was huge. I ended up fitting an entire bakery where I actually spaced things out quite a lot, and an entire apartment with 2 big bedrooms in it. And I still felt like I was just kind of loosely using the space. So it was definitely a challenge to make it work and to really still sell that feeling of this being a very narrow and small Amsterdam building, because it was actually on the inside also a bit too wide to really make that work. So later in the video, you'll see me actually like decorating this video, and so in a little bit, you'll actually see me starting to work on the decoration of the build itself. And I'd like to tell you some things about the inside of this build and like the color scheme and stuff. So there were two things that I had in mind for the color scheme, and that was mostly a warm caramel brown, because obviously this build was supposed to be inspired by a stroopwafel. So I wanted to make sure to convey that beautiful caramel golden brownish, because I think that really makes it also look very cozy. But I also really wanted to go for the blue and white tile, which in Dutch is called Delft blue. Delft blue is a very typical way of making or glazing tile, I would say. I'm not really sure how to translate that in English. It's hard for me to like translate and explain this because I'm also not the biggest history nerd. I'm dating a historian, so I do know some things, but I don't know how to translate it properly. But I think it's glazing tiles, and not just tiles, by the way, also ceramics and stuff. And they are very often printed with like flowers or some little people with like the wooden shoes and the very typical Dutch outfit. And it's like a very traditional Dutch craft to make these blue tiles, and it's called Delft blue. And I think it is a really big part of our cultural heritage, so I figured that it makes sense. You actually see it all across the country in many places, and I think even in Amsterdam, like very often in touristic places, they put an emphasis on this as well. So I figured, why not just add it to our bakery to really convey that Dutchness basically of this build. Something that is extra funny about this is that very often when you buy stroopwafels, specifically the touristic ones though, or if you get like a gift with a little tin of stroopwafels in it, the tin itself very often is colored in blue and white, and it has the typical Delft blue pattern on it as well. So I figured there is just a perfect match here. There's an opportunity for me to show a little bit of Dutch culture, but there's also the opportunity to again make that link back to stroopwafels. So that's what I did. I came up with that color scheme. It was actually quite a challenge to make that work because blue and white are obviously quite cold colors, and then the golden caramel one is like the most warm color that you could go for. So I had to get a bit creative of figuring out how I wanted to use that in the build itself. But I think I did a pretty good job, and I am really happy with how it turned out. The funny thing of this is that it also very much pushed me out of my comfort zone, because I very rarely do builds that are extremely patterned. I very rarely use like patterned floors or patterned wall tiles, and then let alone if I go for something that's very patterned, I tend to keep the furniture very modest and simple. Yeah, that's not what I did for this build. For this build, I definitely went out on all of those aspects, and it was quite challenging for myself to get through that, because for a long part in the process, I thought to myself, this does not look good. I do not enjoy what this looks like, but I think in the end, it actually worked out all well, because it just took some adjusting, I think. It just took some time for everything to come together, but as soon as everything fell into place, I was enjoying all of the busyness and all of the patterns that came together. So yeah, that was basically what I did for the color scheme. As you can see, I end up going for like a checkered floor with the blue and white. We also end up adding quite some blue and white on the walls in the kitchen. And then the rest of the furniture and the walls and everything is very much focused on that warm caramel color. Some of my favorite parts of the interior that I did, apart from the kitchen itself, is that we end up making this really big stroopwafel mural on the wall at the back, because it's kind of a nod to stroopwafels becoming more touristic these days. And obviously you always have those like tourists that want to take cute pictures everywhere. So we made kind of like a touristy influencer wall in the Stroopwafel Bakery itself, so that everyone that visits this place can actually take a cute selfie with their stroopwafel in front of the big stroopwafel sign. So my request to all of you, if you're watching this video and you do end up downloading this build because you might want to place it in your save file to actually go and play, please take a selfie with your sim that is going there in front of the big Stroopwafel sign. And if you're gonna post that anywhere on any of your socials, please tag me in it, because I'd love to see this Stroopwafel sign kind of popping up across different sim saves and different simmers, because this is one of those things we spend forever tooling this. I'm not gonna spoil what it looks like exactly because you'll see me working on it later, but let me just tell you, the Batu pack came in clutch. I'd never expected to be so happy with the Batu pack, but it really saved my ass when I was trying to make a Stroopwafel in-game, and it ended up looking so good, and I really enjoyed the whole process. So if you do end up downloading this build, please take those selfies in front of the Stroopwafel, because I would love to see it. Then other things that you'll see in this bakery is that we'll end up adding a nice big reading table where you can read like the newspapers and stuff. We end up adding a place where you can like work on your laptop and have your coffee for all of the younger people in town that also just use this bakery as a place to work. And then also the little tables actually have a red checkered pattern, because the red checkered pattern is very typical for when you're buying a fresh stroopwafel. It will usually be wrapped in a paper that has that pattern on it. And the fun thing is we do end up using the woohoo blanket again. I know that I said it in my previous speed build video as well, but the woohoo blanket kind of accidentally became a staple for all of the builds of this season. I even end up adding it to the last build as well, so it is truly in every single build that I did so far. But the checkered little pattern on the tables that you'll see me adding inside is again a little knot, and I think that ties it together very well. I used a lot of reds as accents, so we have the tablecloths, the espresso machine is also red, and then in the kitchen you'll also see a bunch of red details, which I think is kind of like the perfect connection between the blue, because red and blue are both primary colors, and then also having the warmer color that's like the orange. I think the red is kind of like the connecting factor in the two, because I think it really brings everything together. Then for the kitchen, I try to represent every single step that you need when making stroopwafels. So there are 2 stations where you can actually make the waffles. So I added a bunch of waffle irons. I'm very glad that we have the Home Chef Hustle pack, because it definitely came in clutch when making this whole build. So there is also a station or like a little place in the kitchen where they can prepare the batter, because when they make stroopwafels, they basically have some sort of, it's not really dough, but it's also not really batter. It's kind of like in between. And then they put that in the waffle iron to actually make a waffle. Then from there, they take it out of the waffle iron, and we made sure to place some spatulas so that your sims won't burn themselves when taking the waffles out. Then they use a knife to basically split that waffle into 2 really thin halves. Then there's a big pot with the melted caramel in it, and then they'll use a spoon to put the caramel in between the 2 waffles, and then they place the waffles back on top of each other, basically sandwiching the caramel in between. If you go to more touristic places, you might actually find that they also have a bunch of toppings, so you can add like chocolate and sprinkles and whatnot to your stroopwafel. I wouldn't necessarily recommend getting your first stroopwafel with a lot of toppings, because I think you're missing out on the true flavor of a stroopwafel, which on its own is already extremely delicious and already quite sweet. But if you have had stroopwafels many a times, then of course it is fun to kind of go out there and see how you can make them a little bit more delicious. I will make a slight exception for this. If there's a place that sells salted caramel stroopwafels, then go for it, because honestly the salt just enhances the flavor of the actual stroopwafel, so it's just a win-win situation for everyone. Learning how to make stroopwafels was actually one of my favorite parts for this build, because I actually didn't know how they did it. I mean, obviously I've seen them do it when I went to a little stroopwafel place at the market where I could get some fresh ones, but really truly learning about all of the steps and how to represent them in The Sims was super fun to do, and I'm actually really tempted to go make some stroopwafels myself. I don't have the special waffle iron for it, so I'm not in a position to do that right now, but I've been like really tempted to buy myself one of those waffle irons. But I also know that that's probably an ADHD thing, that I now know how to do it, so I want to do it. But the thing is, I'll probably do it like once or twice and then I'll get bored, because I also know that caramel gives a lot of dishes and everything starts to stick and it's really hard to clean. So maybe I should just stick to going to the market and getting fresh ones there. Then for the apartment upstairs, I actually decided to kind of like make it look like it used to be a nice old small home, but they renovated it, so they kind of like broke out some walls to really open up that space. That was kind of my vision. I also made sure that it looked like really stylish and lush, Because of course, when you are running a very successful touristic Stroopwafel bakery, you're probably making tons of money. And if you can afford an apartment at the canals of Amsterdam, you're probably already pretty rich. So I made sure to make it look like super stylish and very fancy. And I tried to use, again, some like really rich colors in the apartment. I also went for quite a dark color scheme because I guess I was on a roll with feeling like I could do color schemes that were out of my comfort zone. So I just decided, you know what? Why not? Let me just go ahead and make the apartment in a color scheme also something that I never do before. So that was a lot of fun. I also like the idea that the people that live up there are the owner of the bakery downstairs. So they kind of translate that warmer color from downstairs of all of the caramels and all of the waffles into their home. But then I decided to make a teenage room for the kid living with their parents there. That is kind of completely opposite of anything else that you've seen so far, because the kid is like genuinely trying to figure out their own style and trying to figure out, you know, what they want their room and their life to look like. But I still had to make it fit with all of the other things in the house. So that was a fun challenge for myself to kind of figure out how I could get creative with colors and make sure that this works. So now that I've talked you through all of the color schemes and the visions and everything that you can see and find in this build and that you'll see me make in this speed build, I think it might be nice to kind of talk you through some of the challenges that we ran into with this build. So of course, obviously, this build is really big. It was, I believe on the top of my head, on a 50 by 50 lot, but every single inch of this lot is decorated with great detail, and that makes a big lot feel really big. This build took me about 8 to 10 hours to complete, and I was building it mostly on stream, which always slows me down a little bit. I think if I were to do it off stream, I would have been slightly faster. But at the same time, I also wouldn't have done some of the best details of this build because I wouldn't have had people in chat helping me out, coming up with great ideas and stuff. But I think this took me 8 to 10 hours to complete, maybe even a little bit more. Another challenge that we really ran into was the fact that this is very clearly supposed to be a bakery and not supposed to be a cafe. And The Sims obviously doesn't have the most items for a bakery, so coming up with a concept that really showcased the bakery part of the build or the bakery part of the challenge and didn't put as much emphasis on just the cafe part of the challenge was quite difficult. I already mentioned it earlier, the Home Chef Hustle Pack really came in clutch because without that, I would have never ever been able to do this, but it was genuinely one of those things where I first started out really focusing on the cafe part of it, and then I realized that I was really missing out on the original assignment for this challenge, and that was to make a bakery. Something else that was quite a challenge is that we don't really have any cookies in the game. Like, you can make cookies, your Sims can play and bake cookies, but they cannot really make a singular cookie, like an item that we can use in building. There is plates that are supposed to have cookies. There's a couple of cookie-inspired things like a rug and stuff, but we don't really have a cookie that I could use and like place on the little napkin to fake it being a stroopwafel. So then I struggled and struggled because I really believed that adding a stroopwafel would be the finishing touch or the final detail that this build needed to potentially win this week's challenge. So I thought about it and I thought about it and I couldn't come up with anything. So I asked my Twitch chat, and someone at one point said, "Have you tried maybe tooling around with the air vent from Batu?" And let me tell you, this absolutely saved my life because it turned out to be the perfect stroopwafel, and it was indeed the missing detail to really bring this build to life and to really sell that idea of this being a stroopwafel bakery. That might be a very nice bridge into the actual scoring of this week. So we did end up winning this week. It was a shared first place with 2 other people because the builders this season are genuinely phenomenal. So the other builds that were submitted were also literally so good. And the funny thing is that one of the other people that got first place actually also went for a stroopwafel. which is so funny that the Stroopwafel actually won, and I jokingly said Stroopwafel for the win, quite literally, because apparently the judges really like Stroopwafels, as they should, because they are a super delicious cookie. But we did super well with this build, and this being week 3 means that there is only 1 week left. And of course, keep an eye out for the video for the final week, because that is where I can tell you whether we've officially won this challenge or not, because by winning this week, it did put us on top of the leaderboard, and the scoring is going to work in a way that there will be a winner of week 4, but then there will also be an overall winner. So if we win week 4, or if we place high enough on week 4, we might actually win this season. And of course, keep an eye out for that so I can tell you whether we were the winner. But we did win this week, and it's been a great honor building alongside so many amazing and talented people and being able to win. It's really challenged me creatively. I feel like I've had to push myself a lot, learn a lot of new things, specifically for Tool, for instance, to be able to even do a build like this. So if you're seeing this and you're like, Ro, I love this build, I want to have it in my game, you can actually download it. It is up on my gallery. My gallery ID is just Rosannatxt, just like my name is anywhere on any platform. But if you actually like this shell so much that you want to try it yourself, or you want to join in on any of the other challenges from previous weeks, you can actually download all of the shells on Juby's gallery. And if you follow the Builders Games on Instagram, you actually can see all of the prompts and the original assignments from every week. So you can also join along. And if you like your build and you'd like to share it, there is also a little community section in the Builders Games Discord where you can share your builds and your interpretations of the challenges as the builders build them week by week. So keep an eye out on the socials of the Builders Games if you want to join any of the future seasons, or even if you don't want to join, but you would like to kind of join unofficially and just for funsies to join the builds and to kind of just build alongside the official builders, you can actually do that. So just make sure that you follow them on Instagram and that you join their Discord, because that's where they have all of the information ready for you. And yeah, let me know in the comments down below what your favorite cookie is, because I always love learning about different people's favorite cookies and favorite baked goods and favorite desserts. So let's just make it a big dessert party in the comments and talk about delicious foods, because maybe that will inspire me to get back to baking more, because I have been feeling a baking itch ever since joining this season, and maybe I just need you guys to ignite my baking flame again with suggesting a lot of delicious desserts in the comments. But I think that is going to be it for the voiceover of this video. I'm going to leave you guys with the rest of the build with just some nice music, and as always at the end of this video there are some screenshots from different perspectives of this build and the final product. So please feel free to wait out the video and like kind of just play it in the background while maybe you are also building in The Sims, and take some inspiration away from it, and then watch the screenshots at the end to really see the final product fully come to life. And with all of that being said, if this is the first video you ever see of me, feel free to go to my channel, check out all of the other things I do. I make a lot of videos about The Sims, anything The Sims. So if you like what you see, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We're getting really close to 20k subscribers, which is a massive milestone, and it would be really cool to hit that soon. And yeah, if you like this video, toss it a cheeky like, leave a cheeky comment. And with that, I'm wishing you all a magnificent day, and I hope to see you on a future video. Bye everyone!